Welcome to Lifestyle by Design, helping you solve everyday challenges. I'm Karen Jacobs, a professor at Boston University, an occupational therapist, and a Brookline Rotarian. And here's my co-host.
Hi, and I'm Andrea Kelso, Community Relations Coordinator at Brookline Access Television. Today, our entire episode is in the field. We've been interviewing experts in Brookline on health and nutrition and wellness for our bodies. Our first guest is Dr. Brian Bilchick, a cardiologist at the Lown Center in Brookline, and our second guest is Tara Mardingan, a registered dietitian also at the Lown Center.
And we're actually filming this intro in my office at Boston University, so the whole show is in the field. So we hope you enjoy our two guests. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to Lifestyle by Design, and I'm delighted to have on this segment of our show Dr. Brian Bilchick, and he's from Lown Cardiovascular Center. Did I say that right? Or?
Correct.
Okay.
No, that's good.
And it's been around for a long time, I think since the 80s, is that right?
Yeah, it's been over 40 years. We've had a clinical practice specializing and focusing on the prevention of cardiovascular disease and management of complex cardiovascular issues.
And I've been very lucky that you have taken care of both my parents over the years and kept them healthy, which has been fabulous, so thank you. Now, we want to all stay healthy. How can we stay heart healthy?
Well, it sounds simple, but it's probably a little bit more complex to maintain a consistent behavior pattern of healthy behavior and healthy habit. And we all get sucked in to unhealthy behaviors, and it seems an impediment or an obstacle or a major difficulty to get past that. But when people get into healthy habits, they're able to sustain it. And much of our medicine in the United States is focused on treatment. And we have a sick care system, and there's not a whole lot of focus on what we can do to take care of ourselves. And I think that's a real tragedy. I think there's a tremendous amount of suspicion of the medical practice and profession as a whole, and people are looking for alternative therapies which are much more integrative and holistic and preventive. So I think physicians have failed in the issue of prevention. I think we have had many confusing messages to our patients and to the community. And we need to be a little more focused on more simple rules, how to get back to basics, the types of things that keep ourselves healthy. Everyone knows about these things, but it's very difficult to actualize. So there's this knowledge, and then there's the action, and how do we bridge that gap? And that's the challenge for clinicians. Yet clinicians don't focus on that at all. So your question is, what can you do to stay out of heart trouble?
But you do it here.
We do it here because we realize that unless we engage the patient and they understand why we're doing what we're doing, there's much less compliance, there's much less understanding, and really I would say 70-80% of taking care of people with chronic illness is activity, nutrition, the kinds of things that we gloss over in a doctor's visit. And so what we rely on all these alternative strategies and marketing, and there's a lot of misinformation out there as well. And we don't rely on what the physician tells us. It's interesting, if you engage the patient in their wellness, if you engage them into how they take their medicines, they're much more compliant if they understand it, if you make it simple and relevant to them. The lifestyle management piece to me is the biggest challenge, and it takes the most time, and time is not reimbursed in our healthcare system. And you cannot get a nutritional consult unless you have diabetes. So we'll spend a lot of money on the treatment of disease and very little on prevention, and physicians aren't really trained in the relevance of how to manage it in the office. So my strategy is a fairly simple one, to engage people with the idea of what can I do better to keep myself out of heart trouble. and it's about consistent behaviors. Now, eating is a whole separate issue. We can talk about eating and eating plans for hours.
Right.
But one has to keep simple rules, and that's what I tell my patients all the time. Keep it simple, get back to the basics. It's about portion control, but also about what we eat. And I think we as a society have become addicted to energy-dense foods. And the marketing towards children has been very difficult for us to overcome. And there's a tremendous amount of lobbying. And when I've been involved in the National Forum for Heart Disease and Stroke Prevention, and when we tried to address one issue, which was salt, we thought, okay, if we decrease the amount of salt in the food that people buy and eat, that will be healthy, because salt causes inflammation, it increases blood pressure. Yet there's this entity called the salt lobby.
Yeah.
And the salt lobby went to the administration and government, and they're very powerful and they're very active. And they made it very difficult for us even to initiate a program. New York did a good job in decreasing salt.
Yeah.
The UK, they decreased the amount of salt in cereals and in bread by 15-20%, and people didn't notice. You know, so there's a lot of myth of salt. People, the lobbyists would say that preserves food and all sorts of other things, but truly the idea of we're live in a culture of excess. We have, you know, the senior meal at one of the fast food restaurants down the street. They have, you know, almost 8 grams of salt in a senior meal. And as people get older, they're much more salt sensitive. So that's one aspect of it. So the nutrition is an important part of it, and understanding what we eat and how to try get ourselves away from energy dense foods which make us more hungry. So there's a lot of psychology behind how we eat. There's a lot of physiologic behavioral change or physiologic change that causes hunger, which is truly an emotion, to become more profound and makes it more difficult to shed pounds and be consistent with it. We can all lose weight for a short period of time, and then the body goes into this catabolic state, and then we forget or fall off the program, and whatever we eat gets stored rather than is available for energy. And so we get this rebound phenomenon, and that's when people get really frustrated with themselves as far as the nutrition and the weight. And fat cells themselves are incredibly metabolically active. Fat cells make you more hungry, they cause inflammation, they make you insulin resistant, so they're not just making one feel a little uncomfortable or body image issue. It's more about healthy, you know, physical state.
And having enough energy to do things.
So it's
related, right?
Absolutely. So if what we eat and how it is metabolized is very important as to how much energy we have. If you have an energy dense food diet or high in carbohydrates or very sweet, within an hour or so your energy will plummet, and you'll get hungry again, so you'll get into the cycle of overeating. The other aspect of energy is we live in an environment where we're so caught up in doing so many different things that we forget to take the time out to exercise, and it takes time, and it takes effort, and we all feel that exercise is you know, the holy grail. You either do everything or you do nothing. And one of my challenges in taking care of people and keeping them out of heart trouble is to instill in them a healthy habit of exercise, initially by the understanding of why one does what one does. It doesn't have to be this tremendous amount of exertion. It just has to be a placeholder in one's life every day or 5 days a week to do some physical activity.
So it's being consistent. So it doesn't necessarily mean, you know, going into a gym, going on a treadmill. It could be walking or parking your car a little bit further from the shopping mall and
I think one has to be very creative with exercise. We've, you know, dance is something that's
I love that
taken out of our society for some odd reason. In many cultures, dance was very important, and we, you know, something that one can do. I always tell my patients to pull the shades down, the neighbors don't have to see them, turn the music up and dance. And you know, if someone is unsteady, they can support each other. But it's a physical movement that you can have fun with. Walking is great, sustained walking. Walking a dog that stops at every tree to relieve itself is not as good exercise as just picking the dog up and going for a walk. It doesn't have to be in the gym, it doesn't have to be expensive, it just has to be a sustained activity. And when one gets into the habit of that, it's energizing, you make healthier food choices, and you feel like something's missing when you don't exercise. So I think when you talk about work-life balance and people who are struggling at work and struggling at home, and there's very little time and we're being pulled in so many different directions that it becomes a challenge. But if one is very ruthless about making sure there is time in your day for physical activity, you'll be better off. It not only makes you feel better and you utilize energy more efficiently, but it also has a tremendously beneficial psychological effect and a sense of well-being.
That's helped me a lot because you've told me to dance, and I do that. I do pull the shades because I'm on the 23rd floor and I could be entertaining all of Boston. But I do walk, and that's helped a lot. Just being outside, the fresh air, rather than commuting in a car, if that's possible, that makes such a big difference to your psyche.
Yes, and we've promoted more bicycles here, and walking is definitely promoted, but in many parts of this country it's just not attainable.
Not
and we've created a culture of sedentary behavior. God invented the remote control. There's 24-hour access to food. You don't have to go hunting and gathering, and it's just accessible. And so the way I also explain this is, if you think of physics and you think about us being sedentary, we're inert. It takes a tremendous amount of effort to get us moving. But if you are moving, it takes less effort, less psychological and less energy to keep us moving. And I think that's the idea, and I try to get people moving, and it doesn't have to be a tremendous amount, it just has to be a placeholder. And if you don't have the time, at least take 5-10 minutes for an activity that's going to benefit you. So when you sustain activity for more than 15 to 20 minutes, the body releases certain substances that are very protective. It decreases inflammation, you utilize energy more efficiently, you build up muscle tone, you provoke new vessels and make vessels more healthy, and improve inflammation also decreases cancers. So it's an incredibly important thing, and it sounds so simple. It's just, how do we get people to do it more regularly? And I'm very tough on my patients about physical activity. I cannot manage them with drugs. It's just unconscionable to me. So in the few times that I've had to fire a patient, it's because not because they're not compliant with the medication, it's just they can't figure it out. And what's interesting when you do that is they recognize that there's value and that you're interested in them doing well. And that's the incentive. And usually they come back and I accept them.
You accept them back?
Open arms.
Oh God, I've got to be careful. Well, you know, I'm an occupational therapist, and one of the things that we do in occupational therapy with clients is to have them do a time log, a week time log of how they're spending their activities. And I always find that really revealing, because once you see it on paper, that's when you can begin to say, well, I didn't have to do this. I could put in walking, or I could put in taking a break and maybe cross-country skiing for a couple of hours, you know.
Right. And I think, as an occupational therapist, you recognize that in the workplace, we have not developed environments that promote healthy behavior, and that's a challenge. There are a lot of gimmicks out there now that are helpful in some regard to help assess how much activity one does. There are all these pedometer type things which can be as sophisticated as having wireless Bluetooth and
on your watch and your
they
shoe.
connect with your computer, and they will tell you, and they may even email you, you've only done a certain number of steps in a day. For some people that's very helpful. Some people find it difficult, and when it's interesting, those people who are very sedentary, they actually start feeling a little bit guilty, but it does change behavior over
Mm-hmm.
time. So whatever changes behavior, whatever works,
Mm-hmm.
is a good plan.
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
and so for each of my patients, it has to be an individualized plan, but the basic principles and the ideas behind it have to be, you know, sound.
Mm-hmm.
And so if those principles are sound, you can mold things and create a program. And that's when people understand why they need to do what they do, they tend to be more compliant.
Mm-hmm.
They tend to want to do it more regularly because they feel better. And if they understand what's happening to their bodies while they're doing it, it's very helpful. And at the same time, those people who do fall off the program, they're afraid to come back to the visit. They're afraid to see,
Mhm.
what am I going to say to them? How am I going to react?
Mhm.
Am I going to be angry with them? You know, and I'll walk into the exam room and they'll say, don't shout at me.
Oh.
And you know, it's the last thing I want to do, because I
Mhm.
understand human nature and I
Mhm.
understand these behaviors, and it's very difficult. And when you engage people and they don't feel guilty and they don't feel like they're failing and they figure out a plan, small pieces by small
Mhm.
pieces, they make great inroads.
Mhm.
And you know, from my perspective, if one can institute a healthy exercise program or activity program, that's more important initially than the nutritional program.
Mhm.
Once that's implemented, you make healthier choices.
Mhm.
You can't do one without the other.
Right, right.
You know, you cannot exercise and eat and overeat and shed pounds.
Mhm. Mhm.
It just doesn't work. So one has to address it. But for some people, they need to do it all together, and they're very ruthless with themselves. Other people, they need gradual hand-holding along the way. And you know, I feel when people do well, they are very proud of themselves.
Yeah, and you know, in the few minutes we have left for this segment, what's really great is the commitment that you've made to your patients. It's not just, you know, a visit and, you know, I'll see you in 6 months, but you're helping them make these lifestyle changes and making good decisions, and you're so invested in
Well,
them.
taking care of a patient is a privilege.
Mhm.
They're letting you into their lives, and I always feel that every time I interact with someone. And when they feel that from me,
Mhm.
they recognize that my motivation is for them to do well.
Mhm.
It's not about billing or too many procedures, or it's about them doing well. And I think that's where medicine has lost its way in a tremendous degree. And I think that's why there's so much distrust,
Yeah.
and that's why there's so much movement towards alternative
Mhm.
care and strategies. And I think if you get back to the basics, physicians are very well-meaning. They want to do well. They want their patients to do well, but they're not necessarily trained how to achieve that.
Yeah.
And you have to want
Mhm.
patients to do well.
Mhm.
It has to be in there.
Yeah.
And that's what makes the difference. So
And that's what makes the difference here.
you
Very
know,
much so.
And that's unfortunate.
Mhm.
And the reason it's unfortunate is I don't know any other way, and I don't understand how other people
Mhm.
don't do this, because this
Yeah.
is what works.
Right, right. I'm not sure either. But this is a wonderful place for you to stay healthy. And we really thank you so much for being on our show. This was really informative. I'm going to go dance tonight, and I'm going to make sure that I walk. So thank you for being on Lifestyle by Design, and thank you for watching our show.
It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Thank
and
you. Thank you so much.
Very important questions and important message.
Thanks. Well, I'm delighted to have on our show today Tara, the plate coach. So she's going to tell us about what she does and how she got the name plate coach. So Tara, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And you're called the plate coach. What does that mean?
Well, we all eat off of plates, and I also work with the Boston Red Sox, which is a baseball team, and the plates are synonymous with baseball. So it worked for everybody that I work with. So I decided to, that's what I do. I coach people on what they eat. So.
It's a great name. So $50 million question I'm going to start with. Did the Red Sox win the World Series because they were eating better?
Is that a question?
I think I answered it already. But
well, thank you. I might be slightly biased,
Yeah,
but
of course.
there's a lot that goes into the the equation, and I think food is one part of it. So it's part of teamwork.
It's part of teamwork. So how would you coach someone, like myself, on how to eat correctly?
So first, what I would do is get to know you better. I think one of the downfalls to nutrition right now is that there's so much information, and you're going to get the same information as your next door neighbor, as the person across the street. And so what I try to do is really listen to what's going on with the person, not only health-wise, but where they are in their day, what they're going through, what barriers they have, and then rather than think of it as an all or nothing approach, we just take one or two things to work on and improve, and then build from that success. So that's what I try to do.
Well, you know, in some ways, as you know, I'm an occupational therapist, and when we work with clients, we look at that whole picture as well. The everyday activities that people do, and for you, you would look at it from that perspective, but with nutrition in mind.
Correct.
That's great.
Correct.
So, a Red Sox. Go back to the Red Sox again. How might you, and we won't have to, it doesn't have to be specifically Red Sox, but an athlete. How might you coach an athlete for what they should be eating?
Sure. Similar to what I just mentioned, how there's so much information, I think with athletes they get even more information of, you know, you need to be doing this. Let's take, for example, protein powder. You know, I would say every athlete that I work with, you know, if you're going to call yourself an athlete, it's almost like it's a rite of passage that you need to be taking protein shakes because it's going to cause muscles to grow.
Really? That's what, oh my God. I was like, but that's
It was that simple, right?
But that's what the media is saying about the product.
Exactly. And so some of it is, it's not that all the media is going that way, but it's also, there's a lot of marketing behind it. You know, if the fruit and vegetable campaigns were as brilliant as some of the, you know, sports marketing we'd be all set. So there's a lot of draw, and that's a very vulnerable population as far as I want to do anything I can to be the best that I can be.
Right.
So a lot of what I do is really just what I mentioned. Let me hear what you're doing. Let's look at the position that you're playing. Let's look at what your workouts entail. You know, a catcher is going to have much different nutrition than a relief pitcher, you know, and the timing of it. And so baseball, for example, what makes baseball very hard is that it's every single day. You know, it's routine, which I don't think a lot of people appreciate how hard that is to get into that routine every single day. And so you can build bad habits with a routine, or I like to say you can also build good habits with a routine. So that's what we work on.
So and it's interesting because I am a baseball fan, but I guess I didn't realize that every single day they're on.
Correct.
And even when they're not playing, they're on.
Right.
They're always in that role, and so the habits, the good, the bad, they have to monitor all the time, and nutrition is important. And it's probably hard too because they're on the road.
Right.
So what do you do? What does an athlete who's on the road do when they're, you know, not in Boston, you know, anywhere in the country?
I'm using baseball just because that's where I work, but you know, if you're a minor league baseball player and you have very little money, you're eating at 2 a.m. at some place in some random town, it's probably going to be McDonald's or Burger King. So what I try to do for that situation is help the athlete be resourceful. So maybe they stop at the grocery store or 7-Eleven and grab a bunch of bananas and nuts to chase whatever poor choice they might make at McDonald's. So instead of getting, you know, supersize everything, they get a hamburger and maybe small fries and a water, but then they have a banana and a bag of nuts. So they're taking something that could have been disastrous and they're making it a lot better. For the professional, you know, the big league players, the income is not the issue. It's still the same challenge, though, of enticing food late at night. And, you know, when we have food that's really amazing in front of us, we're going to eat it. So it's how can you work with a routine that works. So for example, you know that salmon seems to be a good choice for you, or chicken, or steak tips. So you look towards those choices, even though there's all these other distracting elements on the menu.
Sure, so avoiding that big chocolate dessert. Or
Or
eat a little teeny piece of
splitting it with somebody.
Share it with somebody. With your teammates. Make more friends.
Right.
Get that piece of chocolate and then share it. That sounds good.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
So when everybody gets to partake, but you can't. You got to be careful though, because you don't want to be mom.
Right.
So it's a balance of. I mean, my philosophy is that you can really have anything. There's some foods that are going to be a lot more nutritive, but you know, if you like Cheetos, okay, you have them on occasion, but you have a really small bag, and then you make sure that you get all the good stuff in.
That's really an important point what you said. So a lot of times you go to the store and you're hungry.
Yes.
And
you're not supposed to do that.
I know. I was talking in general, not myself, although I know that I do that. And what happens is you get so hungry and you just happen to be down the chip aisle, which you should be avoiding no matter what. So the size, and I think that that's really important, and that's what I've been trying to incorporate as much as I can in my own life. If I need some of that sort of comfort food,
Sure.
to look at a comfort food that's healthier for me,
Right.
in the first place. But if I am challenged, go small. You know, not go big.
Yes.
Go small.
Yep.
I want to shift for a moment to children for a moment. I was a guest lecturer and about nutrition, and what was striking to me was that what we used to call home economics.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Is really, first of all, it's not called that anymore, and I'm not even sure what it's called in
I think it's
schools.
just gone by the wayside, hasn't it?
No, they actually have morphed it into something else, but
Okay.
but home economics was something that we had in school. And I'm wondering if that's something that really was a mistake removing, because students learned at a young age how to cook, but how to pick the right foods for cooking. What do you think
I
about
couldn't
that?
agree more. You know, I think whenever I'm working with a client, if they have young children, I often, and I know it's hard logistically, but I say if you can have them come to the visit, I think that's really useful. And they say, well, this is about my high cholesterol. It doesn't really involve them, and they're 5 and 6. But it's a family, and if you can get the kids involved from an early age, just being interested in food. You know, apple picking is a perfect example.
Yeah, that's great.
You know, that's the type of that's what I would like to see more of. Is okay, mandatory apple picking.
We do it in our family. It's not only mandatory picking, but they have to pose for a photo in the apple tree. That's what we've been doing since my kids were little.
But so they have a good association with apples, right?
They
Because
love
of
it.
that.
Yeah.
So more getting kids involved with food, whether it's pushing the button on the blender after they've added some spinach to it. Well, then they're more likely to be okay with trying spinach because they've been engaged.
So families need to do it, and it needs to also, I think, be a concerted effort by schools.
I think so too.
And maybe changing some of the snacks that are in schools.
Sure.
And I know many schools are trying to do that.
Yep.
But we need to make it an effort for everybody together.
It's I think the challenge with it's not anyone's responsibility,
Right.
and that's what's really hard because I know in trying to change schools, then you get somebody who disagrees with whatever snack choices have been recommended. I mean, you're never going to make everybody happy, and I think that's important too. Is just saying, okay, we're trying to do the best for the group, and there's going to be some popular choices, and there's going to be some unpopular choices, and we've got to try to have a little bit of a variety, but yeah, I think that needs to happen. So,
You know, as you know, I'm at Boston University, and every Wednesday night I teach healthy vegetarian cooking through the Sergeant Choice test kitchen. That has made such a big difference at Boston University, having that Sergeant Choice alternative. And if you go into the cafeterias, they have their little label, and people know. So I think in some cases, like what you're doing, you have to make it easy.
that's right. Yeah.
Easy is key.
Yep. That's my philosophy with the Red Sox too, is we don't, we highlight the good stuff. So it's not that the not so good stuff is not allowed, but we're just going to make it so that it's not as accessible. So if you want to bring in candy and soda, well, then you're bringing in candy and soda.
You're not going to have it there.
Right. We're
It's
going
not
to
gonna be in
make
the
it.
vending machine waiting for you.
We're going to make it less easy for you to choose that. You certainly can, but it's on you.
So, as we're concluding, can you give us maybe 1, 2, 3 important tips, takeaway messages?
Okay. I always say be the author of your own diet book.
Oh, I love that. Yes.
So the reason that came up is there's so many diet books out there, and this is the way that you must eat. And I don't know, my philosophy is that life changes for everybody. And so maybe you're paleo this week, but maybe next week that's just not going to work with your budget or your whatever you've got going on. And it's perfectly fine to step in and out. Overall, you're looking at a balanced eating plan. So be the author of your own diet book. And then I think also really important is that, which I mentioned briefly, the getting rid of the all or nothing thinking.
Yes.
Because I'm a big fan of say, we're supposed to screw up a little bit. I think that's perfectly fine. So eating perfect, just get rid of that. That's
great.
I don't like that.
Well, I was thinking about you the other day because I'm trying to always eat egg whites, and I was cracking the egg because I'm not doing liquid egg whites, and the yolk fell in, and I was like, okay, do I scoop the yolk out, or this time maybe I'm supposed to eat the yolk?
You're supposed to eat the yolk. It was
So I
in there
did.
for a reason.
So I did. So I thought about you, and I said, she would say it was okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, the yolk is in the egg for a reason. It's for us to enjoy every now and then. Now, if you can come across some, real eggs from someone's farm, it would be a disgrace for you to throw away the
I
yolk because
know.
they're just so good.
Delicious, yeah.
So,
But thank you.
Sure.
Thank you for being on our show. This was great.
Yeah, thank you
Thank you.
for having me, and I hope I can maybe I can partake in some test kitchen.
Love that.
I would love to stop by.
I would love you to come. We have such a great time, and students from all over campus come. But as important, people from the community come. Brookline Rotarians are always there, graduates, high school students. So we would love you to come.
Okay, and you don't have to have any cooking experience.
No, I teach how to cook, and then we usually have a nutrition or a dietetics work study student who comes and talks about the whole Sergeant Choice program. So it'll be great.
Great.
So I hope
Let's
you'll
do
be
it.
Thank you. Thank you for being on Lifestyle by Design. Thank you,
Well,
Tara.
thank you, Karen, for interviewing these two fascinating subjects. And one thing that I took away from both of our guests is the idea that health and creating a health plan to maybe get back to something that's more healthy nutritionally or just in general is the idea of simplifying.
Yes. Yeah, making sure it's not too complex to do.
Yes, and that the actual plan and the way you go about it should be simple. You should cut back the craziness, and that it's not going to be perfect, and you have to accept that and just keep looking for where you can find those improvements and have that constant source of activity, just choosing better options when you have the idea. You don't have to be perfect. I really loved when Tara said, be the author of your own weight loss book, weight loss plan. I think that is really great, even though general it's great advice.
It is, and I actually have seen Tara for advice for myself, and it helped me so much because sometimes you feel like you do have to be perfect, that you have to do it exactly, and sometimes it's a little more challenging, but to just take your time to think about what you could do maybe a little bit differently. I also love what Brian said about being active. Park your car further away when you're going shopping. Walk instead of taking the trolley in the Boston area. And I love the aspect of dancing. And I actually turned the music on and started dancing while I was cooking. Well, it still turned out okay. But just, trying to figure out how to be active. Really great advice from both of those people today.
Yeah. So you can learn more about the Lown Center and Tara and Brian's work. We're going to share that information below. And thank you for joining us on Lifestyle by Design.
Thank you.